This is a story of King Midas and his greed, and the examples of greed in our society today. This is King Midas. King Midas was a very greedy king. He asked Apollo to grant him a wish, where anything he touched turned to solid gold. He was so happy with his wish, he went into the garden and started touching all of the flowers and all of the living things and turning them into solid gold. He even touched his own daughter, and she turned into solid gold. But he was so happy, he forgot all about her and kept on doing his thing. When he had to go eat, though, he was unable to, because anything he touched would turn to solid gold before it even reached his mouth. And when he tried to drink, the water turned to gold as soon as it touched his lips. He even asked his servants to feed him, but they were unable to. Okay, and these are the examples of greed that we have in our society. So tobacco companies, oil companies versus electric cars, and the defense industry, which profits from war. First, we'll start with the greed from tobacco companies. Tobacco companies, they denied that tobacco causes cancer. They said that smoking is not addictive. They used deceptive advertising techniques, which I'll show you later. And they released a new thread, e-cigarettes, which run on vapor. Some of the deceptive advertising that they used is this one, which says that Craven will not affect your throat, while about 60% of throat cancer deaths in Canada were due to smoking. This Go Lucky brand says, if you're happy, go lucky. And a fact from the World Health Organization says that tobacco kills nearly 6 million so-called lucky people each year. They even use Santa to advertise their cigarettes, saying that it's light to smoke and that it's like cool, and even Santa Claus smokes. And tobacco kills up to half of its users. Each day, more than 3,200 people younger than 18 years of age smoke their first cigarette. Tobacco kills 1,200 Americans each day, and it is more than from murder, suicide, drugs, alcohol, and car accidents combined. With this tobacco company, or this tobacco brand, Viceroy's, they say that they filter the smoke, and they even show a dentist who says, as your dentist, I would recommend Viceroy's. They profit from the nation, of course, from selling their tobacco. They earn $71 billion per year, but the problem is, the America's budget goes down $193 billion in annual health-related economic losses. The American Lung Association is concerned about e-cigarettes becoming a gateway to regular cigars, especially in light of the aggressive industry marketing tactics targeted at youth, including the use of candy flavors and the glamorization of e-cigarette use. E-cigarettes used among 8th and 10th graders was double that of traditional cigarette smoking, and the school students, the use of e-cigarettes use among high school students increased by 61% from the year 2012 to 2013. The next topic will be the greed of military companies. USA is the #1 military spending company in the world. They spend $71 billion, or $711 billion of their budget on military. While comparing to these other 13 countries, they only spend $695 billion, and that still doesn't top the $711 billion that USA spends. Education is one of the prior things of America, but America ends up spending 57% of their budget and only 6% on education, while 57% goes to military and only 6% goes to education. US spends more and more every single year. During the World War II, they averaged about $900 billion spent on
War.
on war. But as the years go by, as you can see, this graph shows that they're spending more and more every single year. And soon we don't know how high it will be. These are some of the companies that profit from the federal government. The federal government pays them $39 billion per year, and these companies spend around $2 million on political campaign contributions and $15 million on lobbying expenses. Military contractors. Private firms received at least $138 billion of U.S. taxpayer money during Iraq and Afghanistan wars, and nearly 30% of that sum was received by Halliburton Company and its spun-offs. The level of corruption by defense contractors was as high as $60 billion. And the last subject will be, who killed the first electric car? The EV1 was one of the first electric cars created by General Motors. They produced it in the late 90s. The reason they produced it was because of all the smog being created by all the other cars, polluting the air. And so they passed out a mandate, the CARB-ZEV mandate, which said that 10% of the cars sold have to be electric. The public was thrilled about this idea, but the oil companies weren't. They started a media campaign against it, saying that batteries that the car produced or that the car used was really bad for the environment, even though the smog that the other cars were creating was even worse. And the batteries were actually perfectly fine. General Motors said it was losing money, so the CARB-ZEV mandate was drastically scaled back. Attackers on electric cars by the oil industry are on par with misinformation campaigns promoted by big tobacco companies and vested interests undermining climate science. This is a quote by Elon Musk. US still lags on fuel economy. As you can see, they are trying to keep their mileage per hour as low as possible so they are able to earn as much money as they can from the oil that they get, comparing to the other countries that are way higher. Market share of electric cars in California. CARB mandate is able to raise the share up to 10% by 2003, while right now in California, they were only able to sell 1.41% in 2014. Do they really need the taxpayers' support? In 2013, the US federal and state governments gave away $21.6 billion in subsidies for oil, gas, and coal exploration and production, while the 5 largest oil and gas companies reported more than $104 billion in profits in 2013. In conclusion, going back to the original story, King Midas was harmed by his own greed. What I have shared with you demonstrates the abundance of greed in our society today. Whether in our oil companies, defense contractors, or politicians, the list goes on. One would hope that our generation would open their eyes to the harm that these groups have caused and work to make purposeful change to humankind.